Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another edition of Spanglish Sports World here on the Spanglish World Network and Singo TV channel 250 and 249. Remember that you can find Singo TV on iOS and Android in the respective stores. Please download the application, and once you have downloaded those applications and see our programming, please let us know if the application is correctly and if there is any other programming that you would like to see from us. Remember also that Singo TV can be found on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. I would like to welcome you to this show. We'll be talking. It's a show all about baseball today. And we have two really interesting people joining me here on the panel. First is Jason Takefman.
Takefman. I'll take it.
Takefman.
It's a tough one.
And he is the former GM for the Vancouver Canadians. And on the bottom, you can see on your screen Rick Kotick. And he is the president of KB4 Communications. So, gentlemen, thank you for coming to the show today. And we want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the current day in baseball, because it's a lot of changes have happened due to the pandemic. A lot of rules have changed to make the game faster, or so they say. I haven't seen that yet, but we'll figure out during this hour show. So first of all, Jason, thank you very much for being here. Can you give us a little bit of your background in baseball as a whole?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. This is a great setup, and I look forward to connecting with your audience. For me, I worked in minor league baseball for 8 years with the Vancouver Canadians, Canada's last minor league baseball team. Once we have a little bit more time, I can tell you how I ended up there. It's a crazy story involving immigration. So my last 4 years with the Vancouver Canadians were as general manager. We were the Oakland A's affiliate for a while, and then we became the Toronto Blue Jays affiliate, which the organization still is. And afterwards, I went to the UFC to help with the Canada, Australia, and New Zealand business. And then I went to the Canucks to be director of corporate partnerships. And now I am a sports consultant, helping venture capitalists invest in sports and helping small organizations, small sports organizations right size in sports, and small organizations that sort of invest in sports, so to speak. And I also have a baseball podcast, which is the @IBWAA baseball podcast, which runs weekly.
That's terrific. Rick?
Well, first of all, like Jason said, Eduardo, thanks for having me on the show. This is a great platform, and I'm looking forward to connecting with the viewers. My background in baseball comes from one of passion. Played ever since I was a kid, played rep baseball here in Toronto, Ontario, and played high school ball as well. And I stay involved I'm a certified AAA rep baseball coach in Ontario, and I'm currently the head coach of the 10U rep team for North York. I also am chairman of the board for the North York Baseball Association, so overlooking all the house league, rep, and select teams that North York offers throughout the province year after year. So it helps me stay involved with youth sports. It feeds my passion for baseball. I'm a lifelong Jays fan as well, and just love talking ball anytime we can. So thanks for having me on.
Terrific. So let's start with give me 1 second. And here is my co-host and good friend and one of the greatest podcasters in the industry, Mr. Ari Shapiro. Ari, welcome back to your house. We have with us Jason and Rick. Jason is the former GM for the Vancouver Canadians, And Rick is the president of communications firms here in Toronto, KB4 Communications.
It's a pleasure, gentlemen, to be the world's greatest podcaster, both fashionably late and not prepared. But thank you for your patience. Good to see you. And Jason, good to see you again, Jason.
Good to see you again. And listen, if you're the world's best podcaster, you can't show up to these things on time. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, the paparazzi will kill you.
Nice to meet you, Ari.
Nice to meet you as well, Rick. Pleasure being on with you here.
So as I was saying, we are going to start talking a little bit about the state of the game, because Major League Baseball has made a bunch of changes. Let's start with the most recent news, and that's with regards to the All-Star game being moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Coors Field in Denver, Colorado. What's your impressions? What do you think it was the right decision by Commissioner Manfred? Jason?
Thank you. You know, I'm not a geopolitical expert. I don't claim to know. I live in Vancouver, BC. I don't claim to know very much of the political landscape in Georgia. That said, the people who do said that the bill was not very kind to minorities. There was a lot of voting restrictions, and I don't really want to get into that. Just looking at the reaction to it from a baseball perspective, I think it'll net out a positive, and I think it's a very smart move by baseball. They acted very definitively. I have no doubt Atlanta will get the All-Star game in the next 4 or 5 years once everything settles. The bill gets rescinded, or they can sort everything out. I also think that there were so many factors that went into this decision, including that Jackie Robinson Day is April 15th. And Jackie Robinson, of course, broke the color barrier of Major League Baseball on April 15th, 1947. And Major League Baseball could not have this story build steam had they not done anything. They couldn't have this story build steam as this date nears, because you would literally be talking on one side of your mouth about what a great person Jackie Robinson was and all the barriers he broke and all the great things he did for this sport and how this sport did all these great things for minorities. And then you have on the other side of your mouth, oh yeah, by the way, we're still hosting the All-Star game and the home run competition brought to you by this with, presented by FanDuel and So I think it will net out a positive, and I think that decision will also age very well. I think when you look at decisions like this, you always want to have something on your resume that you said, I took a stand, I supported baseball, I supported our fans. And again, a geopolitical expert in southern USA with U.S. voting rights could totally rip apart why this decision was bad, the left-wing media or the right-wing media. I don't want to talk about that just from baseball perspective. I think it was the right move. I understand why they would not have done it, but I think the pros outweigh the cons on why they did it.
So now I'm going to go to my political face, and that's Ari. Ari, how do you see this decision made by Commissioner Manfred in regards to moving the game?
Well, Jason, that was a really effective summary of the situation, in the sense that I think you covered it nicely. I mean, hopefully everything dies down and we have an opportunity for Georgia to feel special again. My greater concern here is consistency, right? Because Rob Manfred has been so horribly inconsistent as commissioner of baseball that I fear he's developed this reputation amongst the highest of journalistic circles, political connections, people associated with the sport and other sports, of being someone who's more of a commissioner for his owners rather than for the interests of baseball. Because that's ultimately my concern, is the fact that I spoke with so many different people after this decision was made, and there were really one of two opinions. The obvious one, which I anticipated, which was great move. This is in the interests of the game, and more importantly, in the interests of people and the fans. But then what also bothered me were others saying, politically, this is a dangerous precedent, because now it's Rob Manfred drawing a line in the sand and taking signs on, as you mentioned, geopolitical or socioeconomic issues, which, as we know, traditionally, the league under his stewardship has stayed away from those kinds of decisions. Whether it's supporting a union, whether it's showing that he can be a constructive leader on issues of equality, gender, race, so on and so forth. That he came out and did this was wonderful. I thought it was spectacular. It was an opportunity for him to get the kind of publicity that Major League Baseball has been looking for during the pandemic. But I'm also worried that his intentions were in the right place, because if you're going to make decisions like this, you have to do it across the board for all your franchises, for all circumstances. And that's something that baseball has failed miserably doing, especially from the perspective of race. I mean, it was easy to talk about how progressive baseball was, say, in the 70s, where you had over 25% as African-American players participating in the league. Now that number's down to something like 3 or 4%. You obviously want to make an effort to understand how to make the game more accessible and international. This does something for them in all the best ways. And for me, that's what matters, is that he's on the right side of history in the interests of the game as being accessible for fans as well as members of his own organization looking to make a profit. I'm just worried about the perception that he's starting to, quote, take sides, which we know in the polarized U.S. societies, I'm sure you all gentlemen agree, is a real challenge now, because he'll be expected to be consistent on these kinds of decisions. That's all I'm looking for. Is it takes courage and fortitude to be consistent as a political or business leader. This is Rob Manfred's reckoning now. This is his time to show whether or not he is a serious humanist or just another commissioner in what's sadly been a bit of a long line of opportunistic commissioners, including the one that's in the Hall of Fame, Bud Selig.
So, Rick, where do you stand?
Yeah, excellent points by Jason and Ari, and both things I wanted to cover. So if I were to add anything, I would say that baseball hasn't had a history, unfortunately, of being very progressive. When I think about progressive sports leagues that really empower player voices and minority voices, I think of the NBA first, and not just because of the Black Lives Matter movement recently, but just in general, the proactivity that commissioners in the past, as well as the present commissioner, has shown as well. With this step, like Ari said, Rob Manfred has waded into political waters. And while none of us are political experts here, there is that expectation of what is baseball's stance going to be on certain hot button issues going forward. Because once you make a stance like this, it's very hard to unring that bell, right? Manfred has made a political statement. But what I was most impressed with, to be honest, is this wasn't a unilateral decision by Manfred or the owners. It was a decision that was made in conjunction with talking to the players union, talking to team reps. And so with this step, Manfred has shown that, and baseball has shown, that they want to be more inclusive, that they want players' voices heard. And if he were to make that decision unilaterally, it could have been very divisive amongst players versus owners. But to have that kind of collaborative spirit shows that baseball is trying to turn the page. Traditionally, baseball has not been very good when it comes to LGBTQ rights, diversity in gender as well. I mean, we're starting to see that now with more female coaches and our first female GM. This is a step in the right direction. But my only caution to this is you now have to live up to the precedent that you've set. You can't just make this one decision and then decide that you're not going to have a voice or have an opinion on future sensitive issues that face the sport. And as has been mentioned, especially in the US, politics is very divisive. It's very colorful, and it never rests. So I think this is one of many steps, hopefully, that we'll see consistency with Rob Manfred.
So now that we have touched this, the day after the decision was made, here comes the Atlanta ownership and says, we are very surprised at this decision. We didn't know anything about it.
I was going to make the point that on the surface, and those were that was a brilliant perspective of how it all unfolded. My concern is what we see on the surface doesn't reflect what's inside. And I think that there are definitely owners, definitely players that are taking real umbrage with this decision. Because we know politically, if it were that simple, cut and dry, which it should have been really, I mean, think about the statement in its essence. What exactly and how exactly did Manfred and baseball come to this conclusion? They saw something as being an injustice, which politically speaking, when it comes to understanding what is fair and unfair, I think we can all agree on the importance of not catering to one side or the other on the U.S. Media platform, because we know it's going to be divided and sensationalistic. But this decision was an example for me, as you alluded to, Rick, that you have to sometimes find yourself at that junction of deciding which side of history do I want to be remembered on, right? For taking the sides. And in this case, he shocked me. I didn't think Rob Manfred would do this. I mean, here we are applauding him, but the truth is, I didn't think he was going to do this. For me, this came out of the blue, which makes me wonder just how unified he was. I'd like to think he got together with all of his, baseball star chamber forces, and they said, "This is a great idea. Let's do it." But something tells me that there's, behind the curtain, that there's something else going on. And what'll be interesting, as you mentioned, is to see how consistent they are. Because if they're inconsistent, we know this is going to be an issue-by-issue struggle, which baseball has traditionally been terrible at dealing with, whether it's drugs, whether it's equal rights, whether it's gender politics, however it's perceived. Baseball, unlike the NBA, doesn't seem to have very smart people where they need to be in positions of influence. This kind of surprised me. This made me think that maybe there's some smart people behind the scenes.
I welcome that. I actually welcome the opportunity for baseball to speak up on things and to take a stance. I know you had mentioned that in your previous comment about being consistent. Like, yeah, they should. I mean, I would welcome that. I don't think they are going to, because I think they may want to focus on balls and strikes and distribution and game times and all the stuff that they can control. But I would welcome them saying something. They know the pros and cons, and I love the fact that Rick mentioned, like, it wasn't unilateral. They worked together with the union, and I think that's important. One, it's important because of the CBA negotiations that are coming up, and that hopefully you can have a small win that can lead to big wins. But I think more importantly here is that a lot of the play representation, a lot of the union members, and a lot are minorities, are people of color. And, further to the situation that we talked about earlier about the All-Star game, had they done nothing, they couldn't have a situation like in June where there's a few minority players, a few minority coaches who are just like, I don't feel comfortable going here. Like, I'm not going. I'll take my suspension, or I'll take my fine, or whatever. Like, I'm not going. And they couldn't have that be the story. And that's not even fair for Atlanta either. Like, that's not fair for the Braves organization also. They didn't necessarily, as we just mentioned, like, they didn't necessarily do anything wrong in this instance with this bill. And I think by getting ahead of it, they not only prevented a lot of issues from happening, but they were definitive, and they showed we are standing up for, on this side of the aisle, and that's where we're going to take a stand.
And it's not like they have a great relationship with the union to begin with. That's why, Rick, I appreciate the notion that you think that this was coordinated. But my question in my head is just how coordinated, like, was it motivated by the fact that he felt he could get solidarity on this issue? Or did he want to, as Jason just mentioned, kind of nip it in the bud before it really exploded come June and come the opportunity to showcase the best of the league?
Well, from the reports I read, this was made in a collaborative decision once he consulted the Black Players Alliance, which was something that was formed shortly after the Black Lives Matter movement took hold last year. And so had he made this decision strictly on his own, with ownership in his back pocket, I think you would have seen more pushback than we initially did. Now, you mentioned Atlanta seemed surprised, and the ball club said, hey, we weren't aware of this. I imagine there was some kind of backroom conversation that said, look, this is the right decision. We have had some consultation. Maybe it wasn't extremely expansive across the entire league, but we're going to make it up to you. We're going to give it to you in the next 3 or 4 years, but we have to do this from a perception standpoint, from a credibility standpoint, and this is the stand we want to take. I just don't believe that Manfred came out with such a quick trigger decision on his own, with at least consulting, players' representatives and sampling ownership as well.
So let's break the political side and let's go into deep baseball conversation, because new rules have come into effect in Major League Baseball and in the minors. In the minor leagues, we know that they are testing the wonderful automatic umpire. And it's not something I don't think that the umpires union is going to be very happy with, and fans are not going to take a like to it. I mean, the nice thing about the umpires is that they make a show. It's entertainment at the end of the day, and I don't know where you guys stand on it, Jason.
I applaud baseball for looking at things, mostly because I applaud them for looking at things. I actually think that it's important that I always applaud leagues that look for rule changes and look for standing changes and division realignment and new ways to the playoffs. I think it's important to evolve, whether or not the exact decision stays. Baseball doesn't necessarily have an umpiring problem, capital P. It certainly has an issue, with a lot of companies. They're dealing with a very tenured union. They're dealing with a lot of human beings that make mistakes. And while umpires are very good, some umpires, more than most, kind of dilute the game. And I would welcome the opportunity to get a very strong sample size, 2, 4, 5 years of minor league baseball, to see, okay, whether it's drones or artificial, whatever the technology is, okay, are we getting this better? Do we necessarily need 4 umpires, or in baseball, for the life of me, in the playoffs, 6 umpires, when you're putting someone out there for the very first time in left field? That concept baffles me. You would never start something for the first time during your playoffs. But anyways, I applaud it. We can all talk about your Joe West and your Angel Hernandez's and all that stuff. They want to make a show, like you said, Eduardo. It's entertainment. I think they're very good marketers, both of them. I don't really care very much for either of them. I think they're great people. They have some great stories, but if they were replaced by a drone that was 4%, 5% better, I wouldn't lose sleep at night at all. Also, if they weren't not so much them, but in general, very inflammatory. I think that if the science says, or if the data says that we are getting 7 or 8% calls better with, again, an artificial or a drone, and then, managers aren't being thrown out. They don't have to worry about the relationship with the umpire. They don't have to worry about an umpire throwing out a player in the first inning or making really bad calls. It allows them to focus on the game, and I think that would benefit everything a little bit more. Also, and I don't mean to ramble, while Major League Baseball umpires are very good, the refs are very good, and there's the same issue that, in hockey, so to speak, of what's going on with the reffing system, is they make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are in really big spots. And you can talk about Jeffrey Mayer, you can talk about, you need replay. The game is very fast, and the game has maybe outgrown the structure that was set up 40, 50 years ago, when the game was played by guys who were literally 20 to 30% of the size and threw 20 to 30% of the speed all the time. And I think that the more help, the better.
So, Rick.
Sorry, go ahead, Eduardo.
As a fan of the game, taking out, those controversial calls at the plate, how does that feel?
Baseball purists will hate it. Let's start there. Baseball is a game it's got a very long tradition, a very rich tradition in North America, where it started. Baseball purists won't like it. And the reason I say that, and I count myself as a bit of a purist, but I'm not 100% against it, to Jason's point. But what umpires add is there's a color and a nuance that can't be automated, right? And yes, maybe arguing with the umpire, you can't argue with a robot or a drone and get thrown out of the game. Sometimes coaches go out there to argue to get thrown out so they fire up their team, right? There's intangibles that happen. There's a reason they argue. I don't mind. I don't mind having instant replay, and I love how the umpires in Major League Baseball has kind of shaved down the review time, so it's not really ruining the flow of the game all that much. I think it's important to get it right. I don't know that you want to take out the intangibles and the human element for an incremental improvement of maybe 5, 6, 7% improvement in the calls. I enjoy the system where there is judgment to be made. It's not like other sports that's always cut and dry, right? There are some nuances to the game of baseball, and I think that's why we all fall in love with it, and we all enjoy watching it. Umpires are colorful. They're characters. They have fantastic stories. Their interaction with players and coaches really add to the game. And I, for one, enjoy that it's not replicated easily by robo umpires. And so I'd be happy to see live umpires stay, have assistance with instant replay, and I don't mind them trialing it in the minor league system, but I would love to keep that human element in the game.
So, Ari, where do you stand?
I don't know. I mean, Jason and Rick, you both make compelling points and arguments as to how we should look at this from an optimistic perspective. And as a purist, as a self-professed modern purist, if you will, someone who loves the nostalgia and the history of the game, but also functionally wants it to be prosperous, I think this is an absolute disaster. I wouldn't even know where to start. And I'll go back in history and think of moments that got me to this point, whether it was Jim Joyce and ruining Armando Galarraga's perfect game. Remember that? That was when the conversation really hit a fever pitch as to what we should do about umpires who, see, here's the big problem. When you have a union as powerful as that ump union, the relationship between baseball and their umpires, if you look at it historically, has been a tragedy. A tragedy because in its effort to modernize the game, they didn't modernize the umps properly. What they found was that they had old school umps who were blowing calls because they were out of shape and not on top of the rules. And they had new young umpires who were overzealous and basically making a mockery out of the fundamentals of the game. I mean, I don't mind Wes McCauley being a drama queen on the ice as long as he makes his calls accurately. I think it adds a little flavor to hockey, for example. But in baseball, that old school Leslie Nielsen naked gun style calling in that movie, to me, the reason you enjoyed the fanfare and pomp and circumstance is that you always knew that the calls were right. You always knew that there were competent umps. And this is typical baseball. They know they need to retrain and get a better breed of umpire. And instead of doing that, they want to phase them out, knowing that an automated, digitized machine will be so much easier for them to not only maintain the integrity of their game, but also make sure it's efficient. The problem is it'll take away that golden pixie dust that we love, which is so unique to what umpires are to the game of baseball. And I know what you're saying, Rick. I mean, you got to live in the present. You can't live in the past. But there was something about that time-honored past that baseball brought with it in keeping the umpires the way they are that requires us to be very, very careful with how we change things, because I can get over a runner at second to start an extra inning game and a universal DH and all sorts of other new rules. What I can't accept is that if we take away umpires, we're really changing the very fabric and enjoyment of this game. And a millennial may not understand that. You know, someone new to the game may say, this is fantastic. I'm the next Gen Z, Gen Z coming in, and I'll just take it for what it is. But what about us Gen Xers and Gen Y and baby boomers who are still enjoying baseball and seeing the speed and rate at which Manfred and company are manipulating and changing the game? I haven't been a favor of it for the longest time, and my mind hasn't changed in that regard. I still believe that you can get away with just getting a higher caliber of refereeing, officiating in your sport without having to change the actual components to it. It's dangerous. That could be a very slippery slope for the game.
Ari, I agree with you. Hard to argue with the points you made there because they're all solid points, and I think we're on the same side of the line on this one. My question that I'd like to throw out to all of you as well is how far are we willing to go to water down a game to make it more consumable, to make it more friendly to the younger generation? Is there not something to the idea of, you know, something that takes time, that is complex to understand, that has nuances? Isn't that just as enjoyable as kind of, you know, something which is more like fast food delivery that's just trying to make it as consumable as possible to the largest audience? I don't think that that's the direction baseball needs to go in to survive. What do you guys think?
So, to tell you the truth, I am very, very upset with the way the game is progressing. To me, a slide into second base, a slide at hard, slide at home, actually playing a complete extra inning game with a batter run going from home to second is better than starting in at second. I don't see that as delaying the game. The idea of a pitcher being able to hold the ball, and I'm not saying 3, 4, 5 minutes, but you know, giving that pitcher the idea of not allowing the batter to know what he's coming with. That's what the game was all about. What would have been a catfish hunter without timing? What would have been half the pitchers of the all-time baseball couldn't survive the game today because is not made for them. Is not made for strategy. The game right now is for pitchers, and I am not going to say that the pitchers are bad, but they are all. They really go out for the money. They don't go out for the love of the game anymore.
They go for the strikeouts the same way the hitters go for the home runs. It seems like this generation's crop of pitchers and hitters are first and foremost being told that you've got to go for the gold. You've got to be able to shine with the sexy components of the sport. And in the process, we've taken out all the subtleties, the nuances. I mean, why did one fall in love in baseball if they grew up in the 60s, 80s, or in the 2000s? They saw a game that had nuance to it, which is something, being a non-linear, non-time-based sport allowed people to kind of sit and ask themselves, what's going to happen next? Because it never failed. There was always something in a typical game that would happen that you've never seen before, just because the nature of the game and field of play allows for it. But when you make everything about staccato burst moments of intensity, then you've literally taken away the proverbial foreplay of baseball. You're basically telling people, watch this game quickly for 2.5, maybe tops 2 hours. You're going to see Trevor Bauer strike out 14 hitters, and then you're going to go ahead and maybe see 1 or 2 home runs, and that's it, the end. You're not going to talk about the fact that there was a key double steal, or the fact that there was a sacrifice bunt in the 9th inning, or that there might have been a bang-bang play that was the complete result of players thinking organically and intuitively instead of being turned into the automatons that they are. And the Blue Jays are an example of that. Their crop of young players are incredibly talented, but they've got 2-cent heads. Like they have no clue how to play the fundamentals of the game to not only first and foremost try to win, but do it in a way that makes you proud for how you win. Because as we know, how you win is everything. Here we are debating a sport where the 2017 World Series champions, Houston Astros, cheated their way to success. So it's kind of hard to dignify it with nuance when we know that cheating is everything and winning is everything for baseball. It's not about sportsmanship. It's not about, shaking the hands of the player after. It's take your money and run.
Yeah, I don't think the players have 2-cent heads. I'll push back on that. But I do agree that baseball, the baseball product now isn't the same product that A, was designed to be played 40, 50 years ago, or when the sport was created. And then 2, and this is more importantly, is it wasn't the type of baseball that people liked that made it very popular. And it actually reminds me a lot of where the NHL was in like 2003, 2004, where practically unwatchable, the economics of it were upside down. The salary structures were upside down. But I think most importantly is that what people were watching on TV differed from what they were watching on TV 20, 30 years ago. And that would scare me a lot if I was baseball, because what made it popular, this is not the same sport. Yesterday, I got 3 text messages that Johnny Cueto is pitching into the 8th inning because people don't pitch into the 8th inning anymore, and that was seen as like stop everything. And then obviously a couple of hours later, Joe Musgrove throwing a no hitter, which in itself is impressive, but it's even more impressive that he was able to throw 118 pitches to complete it. I would be very concerned about the 2 points I just mentioned, and I also would be very concerned about deviating away from what made it popular. And home runs and strikeouts should not be the end result. And I think that would, that would help the pace of play. It would help. It would help get back to the baseball, capital B, that is played, which is running and sacrificing and moving guys over, and the strategy and a pitcher going through the lineup a third time, and the thinking that involves with it, because that's essentially what it is. That's what we kind of love about the sport. And I'll read you a stat. Luis Tiant, El Tiante, led the AL in losses, homers allowed, and walks allowed for the Cleveland Indians over the course of 37 starts in 1969. In 1968, he led the league in ERA plus, ERA, shutouts, and FIP. So that would never happen now, where forget about the fact that Ulysses Tiant should be a Hall of Famer. He's on the cut. Like, this is a hyper elite player, but someone that is able to have an amazing year, have a very not so amazing year, and then still be a major league starter for the next 7 or 8 years. That just doesn't happen, and you lose a lot of the characters, and you lose a lot of the romance and star power that goes on in baseball when you take that away from them and just make it an end result of walk, strikeout, or home run.
No, I want to touch base on something because you are our minor league expert here. I remember when I was playing minor league ball down in the hot sweat desert of New Mexico. It was something that we went out to the field 3-4 hours before the game and practiced, and then play the game, and sometimes double headers after practice. And I look at Major League Baseball now, and the idea that a rookie or a player comes to the field early, into the clubhouse, and then into the batting cages or into the field to take extra rolling, extra rolling practices or something, doesn't exist anymore. Why did that change so much from what it used to be to now? It's the same game essentially. You still have to practice to master your craft.
I can give you, Eduardo, the youth perspective, if you like. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm very much involved with youth baseball at a rep level here in Toronto. And from a very early age, the coaches are told to put strict limits on how much a kid can throw and for arm care purposes, whether you're pitching or you're a catcher throwing the ball back or any position really. Coaches have traditionally tried to work with kids at a certain level and strengthen out their arms and strengthen their baseball knowledge at the same time, because as we've made the point already, it's a very nuanced game. Where that conflict comes into being is between the coaches and the instructors and the parents of the kid, believe it or not, because if little Johnny or little Sally is a precious snowflake, we don't want to run them too hard. We don't want to give them too harsh feedback to teach them the game. And so I think from a very early age in youth baseball, it's taught that they are very delicate and they don't have to put in as much effort as maybe the coaches would have liked in order to achieve the results. And I've seen that in our youth program from age 8, believe it or not, all the way up to age 18. There seems to be a limit on critical feedback and kind of the school of hard knocks, if that makes sense.
Can I ask you a question, Rick? How many players that you coach have fun or that do it as a means, that play as a means to an end, i.e. a scholarship? You coach at a very high level, so we're talking about scholarships or being drafted or like the next 7 or 8 years versus having fun.
It's a great question, Jason. And I will say it is 100% fun in that first rep year at age 8, and the fun quotient decreases every year that you get older. Now, I would say I'm coaching the 10Us this year, so the 10-year-old rep team, the AAA rep team, and they're still all having fun. But at that age, parents are starting to think, well, little Johnny's got a real shot to make this high school team and maybe get a scholarship to a D1 school in the States. Believe it or not, at 10 years old, they start filming their kids for a YouTube channel, and they start posting all of the kids' highlights on a YouTube channel in anticipation of putting together a college highlight package. And so when you get into the teenage years, 13, 14, 15, etc., it starts to become less fun for the kid and more work. Consequently, that's why you see more kids start to drop out in their teenage years, because it's the parents who want it more than the kid. And it becomes less fun at that age.
One of the things, I did not play or coach at a high level. When I worked in minor baseball, I must have had parents come up to me, let's say 5 or 6 times a month, and ask me for advice for their kid. And their kid would be about 14, 15 years old. What should they aspire to? There are a ton of side coaches and all kinds of programs and former players and former coaches that can say, hey, listen, you work with me and I can probably get your kid drafted in the 20th round. Like I can fix up his infielding and his feet and all these different things. My advice is the goal should be to get an education. If you can use baseball as a way to get a free education in the States, and if your kid is very, very good, they'll get noticed. If he's very, very good, you'll know. You won't be, because you'll know, because you'll have 20 to 25 scouts literally be 8 feet behind him wherever he goes, including during batting practice or taking fielding or that stuff. And don't really worry about the rest of the stuff. Obviously, exercise and, don't sort of worry so much about the peripheral things that are designed to drain your bank account to sort of sell a dream.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, gentlemen, I looked up Johnny Cueto just to confirm what his injuries were before he got back into baseball. The real issue should be, how the hell does a man throw 118 pitches on whatever April 9th in baseball? You see, it's absolutely silly, because we have no consistency in the way some of these athletes go out and do their business. Now, putting aside the fact that Gabe Kapler is obviously playing for fans in every way, both progressively and trying to get a female coach involved, kneeling with the anthem and so on and so forth. But the fact that he used Johnny Cueto for, again, 118 pitches, a guy who'd thrown 120 innings in the previous 3 years, begs the question, what are the standards? What are the fundamentals? And Rick, you talked about it at the minor league level. I played baseball. I played organized baseball. I did a little bit of coaching when I was younger. And I can tell you what I loved about baseball was that it had its coda. It had its paradigm of the best things you can do to be successful at the game. The problem was that in the older days, looking back 20, 30 years ago, as they call it, the olden days, now hard to believe, baseball was about earning your stripes. And when you made it to the show, you felt like you had really done something special as a result of training and focus and devotion to baseball your entire life. So if baseball at the highest level, if pro sports organized, understands that there's all this talent, why is it not fostering it better? Why are the major leagues not supporting the minor leagues better? Why do we hear more and more about teams during the pandemic who are either closing because they're going out of business or don't have the financial resources to give Canadian and American athletes that chance? I mean, it's easy. If I had a franchise, sure, I'd also go out and check the Dominican and the Japanese leagues and other international hotspots. But here at home, we have a lot of young boys and girls who want to become baseball players, who want to play in the sport, and they're not getting the support at the grassroots level. And Ed, you brought it up. Why is this happening the way it is? It's because we're not seeing enough of a commitment from Major League Baseball, which, by the way, is at record levels of profit, even though year-on-year attendance is falling. This is not the model of a successful business, and we're all businessmen here. So you have to ask yourself the question, what exactly are they doing with their own existential future? I worry for baseball. I think baseball is in a lot of trouble. And the fact that we're covering everything from how they deal with their young talent to their officiating to their political issues, I see this thing going in a very, very bad direction as a consolidated sport, especially compared to basketball and hockey, which are in much better shape.
Well, one of the things, and this is why I brought it up, because I remember my career as from my youth, from Leaside League all the way through to college. I was draft. I went into the draft. I wasn't signed. Then my coach suggested, why don't you go down to the Dominican? I'll hook you up with Epi Guerrero. And Epi,
they don't make him like him, do they? Ever? They never will. Has there ever been an Epi Guerrero?
There is not too many Epis that can be 300 pounds and jump over second base and throw a double play. No, that doesn't exist. But I remember in the DR being in the Dominican Republic and Epi in his motorcycle at 5 o'clock in the morning behind us and saying, whoever doesn't get ahead of me to back to camp doesn't eat. And we were just running like madmen because it was 70-degree weather already at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were sweating, and we said, no food, there is no way. And it inspired a lot of us. And to work hard. And when you get into the minors and then you say, okay, here is an avenue for me to get to the proverbial spot in baseball. Go to the majors, and you work your butt off. I mean, I remember going through practices at 11 o'clock in the morning, and then the game started at 3, and then at 7, a double header. And you said, wow, and you were really excited to be a player. Now you don't see that. And that's what bothers me, that baseball has turned off the idea of hard work and dedication to the craft. Players don't do that anymore.
You can see it with the Blue Jays. Their best hitter right now, finally, is Vlad Guerrero Jr. But it took Vlad Guerrero Jr. a couple of years in the show to realize he wasn't ready for the show. Yeah, that's just the truth. I don't care how
such an anomaly.
He really is, but he's a classic example of what Ed just described and what you, Rick, were talking about earlier with your minor league experience. You want to tell me he was getting up at 6:30 in the morning as a 16-year-old and focusing on his training and his weight control and everything? No, he came to the majors with his OEM parts as if he'd never been shrink wrapped open before. And we realized that, hey, if you didn't do the fundamentals, you're not going to succeed in the sport. I love that. That's the one thing about baseball that hasn't changed. You can't fake it. There's too much scrutiny.
I was going to say, you weed out the fakers right away. It's a very humbling game in that respect.
It hasn't changed.
And what Ed was saying, it's funny because when I think of Epi Guerrero, I think of George Bell and Manny Lee and Tony Fernandez, and they came up to the show with humility. Maybe not George Bell, he had a little arrogance to him, and deservedly so. But they all credited back their roots, and they all talked about how Epi was such a formative part of their careers. When I think about players today, for some reason, the scene that flashes in my mind is Corbin Burnson from Major League when he says to the coach, hey, my contract stipulates I don't have to do any unnecessary calisthenics, right? So there's a bit of a change, and you're right. For Vlad, it was a very humbling experience. Now, to his credit, he seems to have bounced back. It's very early on. Fingers crossed that he can continue. But not all players would take that kind of scrutiny and survive it.
And that is such an anomaly.
Not all players, by the way, not all players have Bo Bichette and Kevin Biggio and Lourdes Gurriel Jarrett to remind them why it's important to do that. So let's credit the fact that he's on a team with young talent that's leading by example.
That's a terrific point. I was actually going to mention that, is that the standard, like sort of the boats are raised by the higher tides around him, literally around him in the field. Guerrero is such an anomaly. I don't like using him as an example because he was a celebrity when he was 14, 15. Obviously, he was signed by the wrong team in terms of enhancing that celebrity and him being in. I'm from Montreal. Like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. signed by the Toronto Blue Jays with their Montreal-born general manager, with Edwin Encarnacion and all these, legit MLB sluggers giving him the seal of approval and saying, oh my God, this guy can hit, is not the recipe for success. Not to mention, one of the reasons why minor league baseball has been right-sized they haven't started yet, but is going to be right-sized and they don't need 8 levels, is that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. shouldn't be able to dominate 4 or 5 levels against players and pitchers who are not going to be paid to play baseball in the next coming years, and they are just filler for a roster. That may have given. I'm just using this as an example.
That's a great example, by the way. That's exactly it on the nail.
Because I always use Marcus Stroman as an example because he came to the Vancouver Canadians in 2012. He was probably at a higher level. I would say Duke University is a much higher level than single A short season. And he's striking out guys, 10 pitches, 11 pitches, striking out the side. These guys are accountants now. They're plumbers. They're teachers. They're nowhere near. You actually don't know if he's good or not. And you are literally wasting his arm on gathering no information. Yeah, his spin rate and this. Now you can do that on the side at 2 p.m. when there's no, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. should have had a tougher path in the minor leagues. And Vladimir Guerrero is just an analogy for a superstar prospect who's a younger age and everybody should have had a more difficult route or should have had higher obstacles placed in front of him. That's more of the don't hate the player, hate the game. The game has now changed. They're right-sizing minor league baseball. I agree with everything you said, Ari, about Vlad. I think he one of the hallmarks of minor league baseball is you don't want a player to struggle for the first time in Major League Baseball. And that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. should have struggled more in minor league baseball, and Major League Baseball is right-sizing that. Is they don't want to waste 2 years, even from an economic point of view. They don't want to waste 2 years of Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s clock with him not putting up super great numbers, right? They want him to be optimized when he gets to the show.
Well, and you remember the great Carlos Delgado, perhaps one of the greatest players you could argue who isn't in the Hall of Fame, because there was a stretch for about 12 to 14 years where he was literally a top 5 hitter. Why? Because he suffered some humility. He was humble in the early stages of his career where he came up, hit something like 12 home runs in 20 days, and then all of a sudden couldn't hit anything and had to be demoted. Guerrero is never going to be demoted in his life, no matter how he struggles. Why? Because he didn't go through, as you mentioned, that initiation phase of again, eating humble pie, suffering a little humility. Why? Because since the age of 14, he's been told he's the chosen one, that he's the savior of Toronto baseball. Well, guess what? He's now in a depth chart where he might be the 4th savior of Toronto baseball. And that's why he's finally playing better, because he's looking around and realizing, I wasn't prepared. He still doesn't have the fundamentals. I hate to say this, Rick and Jason, Ed, there's a rude awakening here where down the stretch this year, you will see the kinds of errors and mistakes that Vladdy will make, primarily because he wasn't taught those fundamentals. And this is a kid with a father who was as mercurial as he was.
Gentlemen, I want to ask you, we can continue this conversation now, or we can continue the next show, but I would prefer to continue it now. Are you guys willing to stay a little bit longer?
I can do a few more minutes.
I can do a
few minutes.
A few more minutes as well, yeah.
Awesome. So let's continue the conversation, because one of the things I have always argued, I'm talking bloody ball now, is that Vladdy hasn't been given the chance to play where he wants to play. He is a natural third baseman or shortstop. He has been moved now to a position where he's stagnant. And why would the Jays do that to him? And now I'll bring another name into the game. His name is Nate Pearson. We have a tradition in Blue Jays baseball of burning pitchers out, because we overuse them in the beginning of their careers to try to see everything that we can get out of them. And then they say, oh, why did you get injured? All of a sudden, it's the player's, he must have done something at home that ruined his arm. It wasn't us. Where do we go from here, guys?
I think it is a absolute of the blessing and a curse to have someone like Roy Halladay, who, by the way, Ari, you could have said the exact same thing you said about Carlos Delgado. Roy Halladay is the pitching version of that. The North American pitching version, obviously, he was a first-round pick, and he was very celebrated. I think it's a huge curse to have these 10-pole players. I see it a lot with the Vancouver Canucks, where, like, you have a good two-way player, he's the next Trevor Linden. You have a really fast, and you're automatically designed. I don't think it's a media thing. I just think people need to have something that they can have seen before. And I think it's going to do damage to Nate Pearson. I hate comparables, especially when you're literally walking in the same footsteps as someone. And I don't think it's fair for Nate Pearson. I don't think it's fair for him his comparable to be a first ballot Hall of Famer because he throws smoke. I hope that he can that maybe the Blue Jays, and again, I don't think it's the Blue Jays' fault, but they can maybe take a Guerrero in the last 18 months or the last 12 months route as opposed to Guerrero in the last 5 years route.
And if you remember, Roy Halladay, if memory serves, had one of the worst, if not worst, statistical ERAs in the season that he struggled in his second or third year. The fact that he had to go straight down to the bottom of the barrel to understand what it would mean to get back up to the top and then become the best pitcher in the game for a sequence in time, that speaks to the character of the athlete. I hope Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has that character, because there's a lot that he can learn from the way that he's coming up through the process. Ed, to your point, I don't know if I'd call him a natural third baseman. I think he's been told that he's a natural third baseman. The fact is that if you watch the way he plays third base, it's just too late. I mean, I think I'm a natural, right fielder with a cannon arm like Jesse Barfield, but I quickly found out I wasn't, whether it was a talent limitation or just dreaming big. At the end of the day, you need humility. And that was a great example, Jason, of Roy Halladay, because it's hard to believe that somebody could fall that badly and then get demoted, which is humiliating because he was on a hell of a path. He was part of that triumvirate of, what was it? Chris Carpenter, him, and I think it was, no, there was a third pitcher that they were hoping to groom and become this epic
Escobar.
Yeah, I think it was Escobar at the time. So think about the way that their paths all, differently unfolded. We were blessed to have Roy Halladay. I don't think Blue Jays fans will ever understand what it meant to have a player of his caliber, character, and humility with this organization. Hopefully somebody like a Bo Bichette will continue to remind us of that, because you want to talk about a kid who goes out and does his job and is quiet about it, never does any media interviews that sensationalizes what he's doing. It's someone like him. We're lucky here. We really have, because you mentioned earlier, look at how many arm issues we've had. I don't know what's going on in Toronto. If you look in the last 20 years, we have ruined a lot of pitchers, a lot of them, by using them in circumstances we shouldn't. And
I can give you six true examples of how they ruin arms. Calvin Escobar was one.
Mm-hmm.
Juan Guzman was another. Jeff Musselman was another. We can go even as far as Mark Eichhorn. Mark Eichhorn was an exceptional talent, but he was just misused every single time after time. Roy Halladay could have been one of those stories. And now you have Nate Pearson.
Well, let's give credit, Eduardo. Let's give credit to Roy Halladay, because he could throw in the high 90s, and when he got demoted, he was a celebrated first-round draft pick, came with pomp and circumstance that you would expect, and got demoted all the way down to single A. Had to rebuild his delivery. I think it was Mel Queen, if I'm not mistaken, that worked with him. And he worked his butt off to get back to where he was. When he got back to the show, he could throw 97 or 98, but he found greater success with movement around the plate. That cutter and painting the corners at 92, 93 was more deadly than throwing a fastball at 97 miles an hour. He figured that out. I'm not sure if it was with the help of Mel Queen or others on the way back up to the big leagues, but he found that success. And talk about a guy who'd show up to a game 7 hours before start, go through his routine. Don't talk to him on start day because he was laser focused. I don't know that the Jays have that equivalent right now. And to your point, Ari, I don't know if we'll ever appreciate the special talent that Roy Halladay was. There's a reason why he was a Hall of Famer. He was so unique in his focus and his talent. It's not something that you can just emulate because you want to. I believe it's something different.
It was a level of professionalism, class, and humility that oozed from the man himself. In fact, I feel bad because if you look at appearances after he retired, it looked like he was really profoundly hurt by not being part of the game anymore. It was just in his blood. All he knew growing up was how to deal with the adversity of baseball. I think even in his no-hitter and perfect game, if you studied the pitch-by-pitch layout and his velocity, it actually improved. His velocity got better as he knew he was about to close out the game. You don't see that with pitchers, like you said, Rick. You've got too many fireballers, hurlers like Pearson who get rave reviews for throwing over 100 in the minor leagues, and then by the time they come to the show, they don't seem to understand that hitters are savvy, hitters are smart, they know how to lay off pitchers. The same thing with Vlad, right? He came up to the show and he thought, hey, I'm just going to destroy pitching left, right, and center. And pitchers studied him. They studied the records, they studied the analytics, and they exploited that. And I agree with you. You need people who lead by example. And that's what Roy Halladay did. And that's what Chris Carpenter did. In fact, the Blue Jays could have had both Carpenter and Halladay in their prime if they had not given up. In the case of Carpenter, they gave up on him, right? He struggled with an arm problem. He came back and the organization thought, you're just not going to be much of a pitcher anymore. Look what he did in the next decade of his career and how he pitched in his World Series. So you've got that humility, that character is a rare thing in a breed of player that we just don't see today.
The ghost of Al Leiter, right, who left the Jays after blister issues for years and then just had a phenomenal 6 or 7 year stretch after that.
Gentlemen, I do have to take off. Eduardo, thank you so much for setting this up. This was a great chat. I really enjoyed talking shop with everybody here.
So I want to thank all of you for being here today, and just want to remind everybody watching this broadcast that this broadcast can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network and its affiliates on social media. Remember that to go to our website, SpanglishSportsWorld.com, for all the news, where you can hear and read the stories from all our hosts and columnists. Remember, Spanglish Sports World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, but especially live it, because Spanglish Sports World is sport, and sport is Spanglish Sports World. In the name of Rick Kotick, Jason, Takefman.
I'll take it. That's good. Thank you.
Ari Shapiro. My name is Eduardo Harari, and you have been watching Spanglish Sports World here on the Spanglish World Network on Cinco TV, channels 249 and 250. Until next time, I say thank you very much, and please stay at home. Please stay safe in the company of your families during these tough times of COVID-19.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Pleasure.